They locked me inside detention. By noon, I had already crowned myself Queen of Students. At the Alien Academy of Zolaris Prime, detention was feared as the ultimate punishment, designed to crush defiance and enforce obedience. For most alien cadets, it worked. They were marched into the isolation wing, a sterile metal chamber with humming walls, stripped of distractions until their will gave way. When they threw me in, they expected sulking, surrender, maybe tears. Instead, I looked at the polished bench and the way the overhead lights glimmered on the walls, and I didn't see a prison, I saw a stage. They never realized how humans turned boredom into invention. I sat, crossed my legs, and declared to the empty room that this was now my throne. The walls echoed my words like a royal decree. Soon, aliens passing in the corridor peeked through the energy barrier, and what they saw wasn't a human punished, but a human ruling. I lifted my hand like I was giving commands, demanding anyone who entered had to bow. Some chuckled, but when a timid insectoid cadet dipped his mandibles in jest, others followed out of sheer curiosity. Within an hour, there was a line outside my so-called cell, because apparently no one here had ever seen punishment turned into ceremony. I named the bench my throne, draped my jacket over it like a cloak, and wielded my notebook as a scepter. The Academy's strict surveillance systems recorded everything, and by the next class cycle, the feed had gone semi-viral across the student body. Aliens of every form began slipping excuses past instructors just to watch the human who called a cell her court. They expected weakness, but humans had a habit of creating strength out of scarcity and authority out of nothing. A crystalline student offered me a snack cube in exchange for a story of Earth, and I accepted with the solemnity of a monarch receiving tribute. Another asked for help with gravitational mechanics, and I declared tutoring sessions part of my royal duties. Soon, the humming walls that once echoed silence now buzzed with laughter, debates, and an odd sense of community. Even the guard drones seemed uncertain, their orders for quiet undone by the constant stream of visitors. When the head instructor found out, they stormed down the hall, feathers flared and voice sharp, demanding why my punishment chamber had become the most crowded space in the academy. I rose from the bench and spoke like a sovereign, reminding them that humans were resilient, and confinement only gave us a stage. The instructor sputtered with outrage, but the students applauded before the energy field lowered. What began as discipline now looked suspiciously like leadership training. By the third day, I no longer waited to be sent, I walked into detention as if returning to a palace. Students arrived with homework, personal disputes, and endless questions about Earth. I dispensed judgments, advice, and jokes that shook the walls with laughter. Supposed to be isolated, I was more connected than anyone in the academy. Some tried to test me. A hulking scale brute barged in, mocking my throne, demanding I yield. I only smiled, tapped my notebook scepter, and asked what issue he had with hyperdrive equations. He froze, muttered nonsense, and retreated before the crowd erupted. That moment sealed the idea that the human in detention was more resourceful than any warrior. Whispers spread from students to the council chambers, where administrators fretted over discipline and control. They didn't understand that confining a human often unlocked something dangerous, not weapons, but influence. Soon, even those who had never spoken sat side by side on the cold floor, listening as I explained that on Earth, detention was where creativity thrived, because students had to invent ways to pass the time. They were stunned to learn that humans often turned punishment into a joke. Even a badge of honor. The academy had never seen anything like it. By the fourth cycle, the bench was covered with trinkets, offerings from students hoping to earn favor. The once blank walls shimmered with projected doodles after someone hacked the maintenance panel and turned it into a communal display board. Faces lit with equal parts confusion and admiration as I sat calmly in the center, answering questions from an insectoid philosopher, a reptilian athlete, and a bird-like singer all in the same hour. I noticed the unease in the instructor's eyes whenever they passed. Punishment had shifted into defiance, and worse, it hinted at possibility. If one human could overturn their system, what might happen if more arrived? That single thought terrified them. I savored it, not for rebellion's sake, but because it proved resilience wasn't brute force or flawless grades. It was perspective. Give a human a cage, and we will call it a stage. Give us silence, and we'll fill it with stories. Give us nothing, and we'll turn it into something unforgettable. And so, my throne room grew more crowded each day, until no one could pretend it was detention anymore. The council panicked when reports claimed the cell had become a hub of activity. They dispatched inspectors with clipboards longer than my arm, who studied me like an exotic creature misbehaving in a zoo. They interrogated students waiting outside, asking why they weren't in class. But the answers baffled them. The human queen teaches us better, said one. She actually explains formulas, said another. She listens, a third added. The inspectors scribbled furiously, muttering about protocol breaches, but I knew they faced a puzzle their rules could never solve. They believed detention shattered wills, mine had only sharpened. The harder they resisted, the larger the crowds grew. I accepted it as natural. I sat upon my metal throne and organized schedules, mornings for academics, afternoons for disputes, evenings for Earth stories. Without meaning to, I had created a parallel academy. Once, they even dropped the energy field to scatter the crowd, but it backfired. Now anyone could enter freely, and the students rushed in like they'd been waiting all along. Instructors hissed at one another, and one accused me of hypnotizing the student body. I laughed, saying, if talking and listening count as hypnosis, then humans are masters. The phrase echoed through campus until even janitorial drones replayed it on loops while polishing corridors. Each day, the throne room became more elaborate. The crystalline student brought strips of glowing cloth from her world's weaving tradition, draping them as banners. A reptilian athlete dragged in a broken hoverboard frame, propping it like a ceremonial spear. Trinkets filled the corners, tokens of respect and gratitude. I realized I wasn't sitting in a throne room anymore, I was shaping culture. The chamber smelled less like disinfectant and more like spice powder from a student's lunchbox, since they insisted food offerings were required. Even the bench grew softer after cushions stitched with alien glyphs were smuggled in. The academy struck back with extra assignments and menial chores, but each punishment turned into a spectacle. When I scrubbed circuits, 3 insectoids joined, calling it a royal ritual. When I hauled heavy datapads, Avans flapped their wings to fan me like attendants. What was meant to humiliate me only magnified the theater, and I leaned into the absurdity until it became authority. By then, whispers of elections circulated. Some urged me to petition the council. One faction even crafted a makeshift crown from cafeteria trays and glowing shards. I wore it once during an audience as a joke, but the applause shook the walls. From that day, even those who mocked me began addressing me with respect. But influence always attracts rivals. Mine came in the form of Korath, a tall horned alien and the Academy's celebrated duelist. He despised that the fragile human had become the center of gravity. One crowded session, he barged in, demanding the students recognize him as their true leader. His voice carried weight, yet the room stayed silent, every gaze turned to me. I knew I couldn't beat him in combat, so I offered a contest of minds. Each of us would solve a gravitational mechanics puzzle, and whoever succeeded first would win. The council tried to intervene, but the crowd drowned them out, chanting for the challenge. The problem glowed across the wall, variables shifting like a storm. Korath snarled, claws twitching as he calculated. I only smiled, opened my notebook, and wrote the solution steadily. It wasn't speed, it was preparation. I'd spent cycles tutoring students on problems like this, the puzzle was routine. When I revealed the answer, the chamber erupted. Korath scowled, but pride silenced him. He left without a word. From that day forward, my throne was not symbolic, it was recognized. The council gathered in secret, torn between expelling me or negotiating. Both paths were dangerous. Expulsion risked revolt. Negotiation meant admitting defeat. So, they tried subtlety, sending emissaries who urged me to tone down my antics. They claimed the academy ran on order, and I was destabilizing it. I listened with a calm smile and replied, order only endures when it learns how to adapt. They could silence voices, but not curiosity. The emissaries returned defeated, and my legend only grew. Strange things followed. Students from rival houses who once brawled on sight now sat shoulder to shoulder in the chamber. Aliens who had never spoken to humans before began asking about Earth, about music, about odd rituals like birthdays and school dances. They wanted to know what it meant to celebrate without a council's decree. So, I told them of dance floors lit with paper lanterns, of humans choosing from kings and queens not by lineage but by votes. They listened as if it was sorcery, and then they wanted their own. One night, the detention chamber transformed into a dance hall. Someone hacked the lights to pulse with color, others brought instruments. The sound rattled the wing. Drones flagged it as a disturbance, but when instructors arrived, half the student body was already packed inside, swaying, stomping, humming to music they'd never known before. I stood in the center, not commanding, just laughing as the rhythm lifted everyone higher. It was dangerous because it revealed something greater than discipline, joy shared across species. And once joy is seen, it cannot be unseen. The council's fear sharpened. Whispers warned of a crackdown, of plans to shatter the throne room spirit with force. But the students only grew more protective, forming a living shield around me whenever administrators passed. Punishment had become a movement, and though I had not sought it, I could feel it pressing toward something larger, waiting just beyond the horizon. At last, the council struck. They summoned the Academy's enforcers, armored figures bred to crush uprisings. Their plan was simple: storm the chamber, scatter the crowd, drag me away as an example. They believed fear would restore order. But fear collapses when people laugh at it. When the enforcers arrived, the chamber was overflowing, students perched on walls, crowded in halls, standing shoulder to shoulder. My throne was no longer a bench with a jacket. It had become a symbol, draped in glowing banners, crowned with shards of light, ringed with gifts from every species. I sat calmly, notebook in hand, waiting. The lead enforcer raised his staff and declared the throne dissolved, the human expelled, the gathering illegal. But no one moved. They looked at me instead. For the first time, I felt the full weight of my words. This was no longer play. It was a choice. So I stood, balanced my notebook like a scepter, and told them humans had a habit of turning prisons into palaces, punishments into playgrounds, silence into music. Fear did not rule us. We invented around it. I told them they could drag me out, but never the ideas now rooted in every mind here. The chamber exploded with cheers so fierce the walls quaked. The enforcers faltered, their boots shifting back. Their orders were clear, but willpower outnumbered them. One student stepped forward in defiance, then another, and another, an insectoid cadet clanging mandibles, an aven spreading her wings, a crystalline peer shining bright enough to blind. The enforcers realized they weren't facing fists or weapons, but unity itself. The council gambled one last time. They hijacked every broadcast channel to condemn me as dangerous, disruptive, a threat to tradition. But I stepped into the projection circle and spoke back through their own system. I reminded everyone of what we had built, rivals sitting as allies, alien voices and human laughter blended, a throne room born from nothing. If that is danger, I said, then perhaps danger is worth more than their order. The response was instant. From every corner of the academy, students marched toward detention, swelling the crowd until the enforcers could no longer enter. It wasn't a battle of weapons. It was a siege of unity. Desperate, the council cut the power, plunging the wing into darkness. But students lit it themselves, bioluminescent skin, crystal glows, handmade torches. The darkness only made the light brighter. That was when the council yielded. They declared the detention chamber no longer a prison, but an open forum for free exchange of ideas. They tried to disguise it as their initiative, but everyone knew better. The throne remained in the center, a reminder of how a single human had reshaped the academy. The days after were surreal. Instructors grudgingly came to ask questions. Students treated the forum as a second home. Even Korath, the duelist who once opposed me, returned, this time not with anger, but curiosity, asking for help with equations he had once mocked. That was when I realized the throne was never mine alone. It belonged to the community that had risen around it. Still, they never let me forget I had sparked it. When new students arrived, the story was always retold, how a human thrown into detention refused to break and instead built a throne room. They said humans could not be caged, because we always found ways to turn limits into freedom. On graduation day, the council tried to sweep it aside, pretending it had been a clever experiment all along. But the banners still hung. The throne still gleamed. The laughter still echoed through the halls. The throne room had outlasted their control. I left with no crown, no title, no official record of leadership. But I carried what mattered. Students who once bowed in jest now stood taller, braver, less afraid of authority. The throne room spirit endured, not as rebellion, but as creativity, as proof that when humans are told to sit quietly, we always find a way to stand louder than anyone expects. Detention, meant to crush me, had become the Academy's greatest lesson. And I smiled, knowing they would never forget it had all begun with a throne.